Hello, and welcome to the Her Head in Films podcast. I'm your host. My name is Caitlin. If you're new to the podcast, you might be wondering who I am. And as I said, my name's Caitlin. I'm a writer. I'm a dreamer. I have a mad, furious passion for cinema, and I started this podcast so that I could talk about films. I live in a rural area in the southern United States, and I haven't really come across people that I really connect to in terms of art and literature and films and the things that I'm really passionate about. So this podcast fills that void. If you're wondering about the title, it comes from an email that I sent a friend a few years ago when I was really obsessed with films. I was in the zone, and I wrote to her, "My head isn't in the clouds, my head is in films." And I thought that was the perfect way to describe my relationship with cinema and how I'm always thinking about cinema. It's very much on my brain, and it's something that I think about a lot. I don't have any academic or specialized knowledge about films. I'm really just a self-taught person who came to cinema through various routes, but but it's just been something that over the years has really grown and grown and grown. So I like talking about films. I mainly this podcast is a personal exploration, and it's really my personal musings on cinema. And I like to filter films through my own subjectivity while also trying to talk about larger cultural issues that may be connected to the film. So it's a little bit of both, and I try to strike that balance for you. Today's episode is about the classic film. It was made in 1955 by Satyajit Ray, and it's called Panchali. And I feel really compelled to talk about this film. I watched it last night. I started it a few days ago and then finished it last night. And so I have to talk about this film because I've really been thinking about it, and it really just has just moved me beyond all words, and I'll try to do the best I can to talk about it. But first, I want to talk about something a little bit more general, but it's still connected to cinema. I really just got into Satyajit Ray's work. It just happened this year. I did see Charulata last year or the year before. I have seen that. Well, actually, more. I would say 2014 probably. I saw Charulata. And I loved that film. But it was not until this year when I watched The Big City. Somebody on Twitter, a wonderful person, recommended it to me. And this is something that I love about the internet and social media sometimes. It has its dark side. It has its. I mean, often I'm so conflicted about social media, and I really feel like I get tired of it, of how it's become this performance in a lot of ways. But there are these other. What keeps me on social media and what keeps me engaged with the internet, especially when it comes to film and literature, is the possibility of revelation and discovery that every day you go on your Twitter feed, and I'm on Twitter most of the time these days. Sometimes I'm on Tumblr and I'll write on there. But when you go on Twitter, like you can just, it depends on who you follow, right? You can just come across an article, or you can meet another cinephile and they can recommend a film to you, or you recommend a film to them, and a whole world is opened up to you that you didn't have before. And so this person who's really great, and they recommended The Big City to me, and I was like, okay, I'll watch it. It intrigued me, and I watched it, and I was like, oh my lord! And I have an episode about it. I was just amazed. I loved it, and I guess I noticed things in it that I hadn't noticed before when I was watching Charulata. And I just realized that Ray really has this masterful vision with his films, and that came off with The Big City. I was so moved by that film. And I mean, I'm not going to go into detail about it because I did in the podcast episode. And it just got me really interested in Ray. And I was like, well, I'm going to look more into this. I want to explore more of his work. And so I've come to Potter Panchali. But what I want to say is that I feel like with the discovery or the rediscovery, I guess, of Ray's work, I feel like I'm going through this maybe third or fourth awakening with cinema. Um, I would say the first awakening that I had was probably a decade ago, probably more than a decade ago, when I was in high school. It might have been my sophomore or junior year, um, possibly senior, but I don't think it was my senior year. I would say it was my sophomore or junior year. And I took a film appreciation class, and in that class, we watched a lot of Hollywood classics. We watched Vertigo and Some Like It Hot and The Wizard of Oz and various Alfred Hitchcock films. And that was the first time in my life, and I would say I was about 14, 15, when I realized that film could be more than entertainment, that film could be an art form just like literature or just like any other art form that exists. And so that was a big awakening for me. And then I would say a few years later, um, I saw The Passion of Joan of Arc by Carl Theodor Dreyer, and I would maybe mark that as a second awakening because that was the first time I had really watched a silent film and had been so moved by cinema. Like, you know, classic Hollywood is one thing, and are some amazing classic Hollywood films out there. But to watch The Passion of Joan of Arc, that was sort of a different level for me. That was like the first time I would say that I was completely emotionally moved and changed and transformed by a film and haunted. Like, it still haunts me, that film. I've watched it several times since then, and it's just, I can't even talk about that film really. So that would be the second awakening, I think. And I wish I knew what year I'd watched that, but I'm pretty sure it came after that film appreciation class. But I can't be sure. I'm not totally sure. The third awakening, I would say, is 2011, when I started to get really interested in art house cinema and foreign cinema. So I started watching like Chris Marker. His film La Jetée was a big deal for me. And Krzysztof Kieślowski's The Double Life of Veronique and the Three Colors trilogy. And Michelangelo Antonioni's La Ventura and The Cleese and La Noche and Red Desert. So I watched a lot of those films in 2011 when I started to discover French cinema, European cinema. Recently, I got more interested in Italian neorealism. Um, so I would say 2011 is the third awakening, and I would say this year, 2017, is the fourth awakening, I would say, with Satyajit Ray's work and going beyond European cinema and really looking at Indian cinema and African cinema, Arab cinema. Iranian cinema is very interesting to me. I love Abbas Kiarostami, and I've seen Taste of Cherry, I've seen Close Up. So I'm getting more and more interested in non-Western cinema. And not that I wasn't interested in it before, because like I said, I've seen several Kiarostami films. I've seen several Iranian films, and I've seen African films, and so it's not like I'm not interested in films outside of Europe or outside the West. But I would say that this year there is this shift for me, and this sort of seismic shift in really wanting to go beyond Europe. Not that there's anything wrong with Europe. It's just that um, there is this vast swath of cinema history and of contemporary cinema as well, and Asian cinema would fit into that too. Like, I'm getting more into like Wang Bing, who does really great documentaries about China. Um, so, there, like I said, there's this vast swath of cinema history and contemporary cinema that I'm sort of blind to, and that I'm ignorant about, and that I haven't really experienced enough of. So I do find myself trying to expand my viewing and to go beyond Europe, go beyond the West. And I think Satyajit Ray's work has really opened the door for that, I think. And I was just thinking about it today, how I really feel like 2017, something has really, really changed for me. And that since 2011, in 2011, I really discovered the directors that I absolutely adore. That would be Ingmar Bergman. That would be Andrei Tarkovsky. That would be Michelangelo Antonioni. And then a few years later with Italian neorealism, De Sica and Roberto Rossellini. I really love those directors. And did I mention Kieślowski? So Kieślowski is my favorite director ever. But these are some of the directors that I really, really like. So I discovered a lot of them in 2011, and since then I haven't had maybe that instant connection with a director. And so when I came across Ray's work this year, it just feels like this electric current in a way. It feels like what I felt like when I started watching Bergman and I started watching Antonioni and I discovered Kieślowski. It's like it's that similar obsession. It's that similar feeling of discovery and revelation. And that's what I'm feeling when I watch Ray. And so that's why I feel so compelled by his work. So, but that's just a little bit of a tangent. I just wanted to talk about how this is something that's really happening for me, where I feel like this is another awakening for me with cinema, and that something has changed this year in terms of what I'm interested in and what I'm watching. Just really trying to go beyond Europe and to explore India and Asia and Africa and the different films of those regions. And I'm watching this really great series on Hulu by Mark Cousins. It's called The Story of Film. It's a 15-part series about the history of cinema, and he talks a lot about world cinema and films that maybe haven't been talked about as much. And he does talk about Europe and he does talk about America, but he also talks about Africa and Asia and India and a lot of different other different countries that have created cinema. And so I've been making a list of a lot of the films that he mentions and that interest me, and my list is like so long now. I have so much to watch. But for now I'm starting with Ray, and I'm going to watch the Apu trilogy this week, and I started with Potter Panchali. And so I feel the need to talk about this film. And so it was made in 1955, as I said earlier. And I just want to talk about why this film is so important for me and why I think it's rightfully considered one of the greatest films ever made. I think it rightfully deserves that moniker for sure. It's about a family a Bengali family in rural India, and it consists of the mother who is in the home taking care of the family. The father is often away. I think he's looking for work a lot, and he's struggling to find work. There is the daughter Duga, and there is the son Apu, and there is an elderly woman referred to as Auntie. So I guess she's considered like an aunt to the children. And so we have this family living in a rural Bengali village in India in the early 1950s. And this film is an important film in world cinema, and it's also an important film to Bengali people and to Indian cinema and Indian people, from what I am seeing when I watch interviews and stuff with the people who were engaged in the film. This film was actually based on a very important book in India, also called Potter Panchali, and especially an important book to Bengalis, and that a lot of Bengali people had read it as children and had grown up on the story. And so Ray adapted the book and made this film. And what is so important about this film, especially in Indian cinema history, is that up to that point, from what I gather and things that I've seen in documentaries and such, is that up to that point, Indian cinema was maybe much more elaborate and much more theatrical, and it didn't necessarily focus on people like Apu, people living in rural areas, people living in these small villages. It was the first film that really wasn't fantasy. It was reality, and it was showing the real lives of a family living in this small rural village in India. And that was actually quite different and quite unique in Indian cinema. And for me, what's interesting about this film is I live in a rural area in the southern United States. I grew up in North Carolina, and it was a small town that I grew up in, and there are things about Panchali, even though this is a very specific story about a family in India, it resonated with me because of my own upbringing. I mean, I didn't grow up in abject poverty or anything like that, and I do understand that there is a great deal of poverty that Apu's family is living in, and that they do struggle to get by and things like that. But this idea of living in nature, this idea of living in a rural area is very resonant for me because it's the way that I grew up. And when I was a kid, I would explore the woods, and I was always outside with my friends, and we would like lay in the grass and look at the clouds, and we would explore the woods, and there was like a creek and a stream, and so we were always outside and we were always in nature. There were trees and meadows and forests, and so when I was watching this film, I thought about how it's really amazing when it comes to world cinema, how you can be living in a totally different culture, in a totally different country, like I do in the United States, and yet I can watch a film about India, and this particular story can have a certain resonance for me. You know, I'm not comparing my situation to that of the family in this film, but I think it's interesting how even today in the Western world, it's very rare to see films about people that live in rural areas. A lot of films tend to focus on people in cities and more urban places, and you see this in world cinema as well, that there is not the focus as much on people who live outside of the city. And cities tend to be very dominant in our culture and in our films and books and things like that. And so it's sort of rare to see depictions of small town life or rural life or village life. And it's sort of something that's very absent, and I think that's something that's very much missing in the various kinds of art that's out there, whether it's books or films or anything like that. So I thought Panchali, even though it's about a rural Indian family, that I myself, coming from a rural background, having grown up in a small town for much of my life, and even now, I don't live in North Carolina, but I'm still in the southern region, and I do sort of still live in a rural area where there's lots of grass and trees and forests, and that's really important to me. And when I went to college from 2010 to 2014, I went to I wouldn't say it was a city. You know, I certainly wasn't living somewhere like New York City, but I was living somewhere where I was not in a rural setting, and I found myself very sad about it, and I missed the trees and the forests and the grass and all of that, and I felt very alienated in a more city environment. But that's a tangent. So I liked the way this film explored the lives of ordinary, everyday people, and that seems to be a theme with Ray's work, because he did the same in The Big City, which is about a housewife who goes out into the workforce in the 1960s, and how that sort of affects her and changes her and also affects the dynamic of her family. And but it's about an ordinary family struggling to get by. And Potter Panchali is a similar story about a family who has some financial difficulties. The crux of this movie, though, are the children. It is Duga and Apu. Duga is the older sister, and she is a bit rebellious, a bit rambunctious. She sticks out her tongue to Apu, and she's very playful, and she even as a child she steals fruit from the local orchard, and that becomes sort of a conflict with some of the neighbors. But she's someone who sort of subverts those expectations of how a girl should act, or how um, or or what a girl should do, you know. And she's playful and she's very alive. I know that's sort of a strange word, but I remembered being that age, and when you live sort of in a rural area, I think you have a little bit more freedom, and you can go and you can explore the land and you can explore the trees. And I saw that in Duga. I saw her playfulness and her rambunctiousness. And there's this gorgeous scene, and I wish I could find a decent version of it on YouTube to share. You have to watch this film. You just have to watch it because it's about life, and um, it's about human connection. There's a very humanistic aspect to this film, and that I think Ray brings to all his films, is this profoundly deep and beautiful humanism. Um, and you get so involved with the characters, and you really fall in love with them. And I fell in love with these children. I loved their playfulness and their openness, and I loved the scenes where it showed them playing in nature and they just looked so happy and free. So even though for the adults in the family there is this constant sort of economic worry, especially that the mother has, and he shows that very real struggle that the mother endures, that she has to borrow money from neighbors, and she has to take on the disapproval of the neighbors because Duca is stealing the fruit sometimes. And she has a lot of pressure on her to take care of these children, and she doesn't have enough money to provide food and to take care of them the way she would want to. And that manifests at times through her anger and her violence. Um, but she's not portrayed in a monstrous or in a terrible way. She's really portrayed as this woman who's doing the best that she can. And like I said, there's always this very deep humanism in this story. And the children really are the crux of it for me. There's such a tender relationship between Duga and Apu, and they play together, and sometimes they fuss, and sometimes he gets on her nerves. But there's such a great love between the two of them, and it's just, I grew up as an only child, so I don't know what it's like to have a sibling, but I think sometimes we can see siblings fighting a lot, or we can see the discord and the tension. And while there is that in this film, at the bottom of all of that is love. There is a great love that that they feel for each other, as they would in any family. And even though there is this great financial pressure that the parents feel, the children themselves don't seem to be quite as aware of it. And even though they have times where they are hungry, and there's a scene where this man comes who sells sweets and candies, and Apu and Duca ask their father for money, and he doesn't have any. And so they go to the school, and they're not able to buy any of the sweets. So they have moments of wanting, moments of longing, but they still seem very happy. They love playing, they love running, and running in the fields and the forests, and they're able, even though from the outside people would look at them and say, oh, they're poor, they are living in poverty, and maybe pity them or look down on them. they themselves have a very strong sense of themselves, and they don't have this sense that their life is filled with despair and pain. There are moments of wanting, moments of yearning, moments of deprivation, of course, but like I said, overall, there's this great sense of love between this family, and it's just beautifully articulated by Ray through the camera. And as I said before, I trailed off. There is this amazing scene in the film that is probably one of the most gorgeous scenes that I've ever witnessed. I mean, in your life, there are some scenes that stay with you. For instance, the marionette scene in Krzysztof Kieślowski's The Double Life of Veronique is one for me, or there's this really amazing scene in Two or Three Things I Know About Her by Jean-Luc Godard, where a man or a woman is looking in this cup of coffee, and the coffee bubbles seem to look like the galaxy, and they're saying like all these deep things. And I don't know, it was just this really gorgeous scene that I liked. And so in Padre Panchali, there's this scene where the monsoon comes in India, and this seems to be a thing in India where they get monsoons, and which is like really intense rainfall and winds and things like that. And so it comes to the village, and instead of running away from it or being fearful of it, Duca especially, she goes out and she plays in the rain, and she swings her hair around, and she's smiling, and it's this ecstatic moment of like reveling in nature. And I sort of think about for myself, like I don't I don't know if it's only in the country, but it feels like it when you live in a rural area. There is this smell after it rains where it just it releases, and I think there's a word for it called petrichor, where it releases sort of the scent of the earth and the soil and the dirt, and it's just this stunning smell that you get. And I mean, when I was in college and I was in more of a city area, I didn't smell it quite as much. So I almost feel like it's connected to the rural and to the country. And so it sort of reminded me of my own experiences of the rain and things like that. And but it's so beautiful to watch Duca just playing in the rain and feeling it on her skin. It's this very sensual and sensuous scene. And I love how the scene starts. Like at first there's just some clouds in the sky, and then all of a sudden this drop of water falls on this bald man's head. And so it's sort of playful in a way, the way Ray sets the scene up. And you just see Duca sort of playing in the rain, and she seems so free and so just gorgeous. It's this stunning scene of Ray really paying attention to nature and really basking and reveling in the sensuality of nature and the freedom that one feels when one is in nature. And it's just probably one of the most exquisite scenes that I've ever witnessed in cinema. And I mean, that alone is worth watching the film, and the relationship between the characters, and especially the sister brother relationship between Apu and Duca. It's I'm not sure what else to say. I don't want to give away the film or what happens, so I don't want to go too deeply into the plot details, because I really think you should go into this film not really knowing a lot of what's going to happen, because it really builds and builds this sort of emotional crescendo in the film. And I just think Ray did such an exquisite job of portraying the lives of everyday, ordinary people in a rural area, and people trying to make ends meet, trying to raise their children, and just this family full of love. And but it's not without its moments of discord. It's not without its moments of pain. And he really just shows the full complexity of that situation, the pressure that the mother feels, and the anguish that she goes through, and the children, their experience of nature and of growing up, and there's just so much to this film. I don't think I could ever do it justice in a podcast, but I really did want to talk a little bit about it. And I think Ray has such a very singular cinematic vision. I just the way he composes the scenes, and I don't even know how to talk about it because I don't know the technical terms. Like I said, I'm very self taught. It sounds like he started out as like a graphic designer and he used to design book covers, and that really doesn't surprise me very much, because there is something very artistic, very visually artistic about the way his scenes are composed. And I love that he used actors for the most part. The children actors were not trained. They were just everyday children, and he really elicited such naturalistic performances from them. And there's an interview that the young Duga does. She's grown up now, of course, and she was talking about her experience on the set, working with Ray. Her name is Shampa Shrivastava, and she played Duga as like very like 6 years old, and she talked about working with Ray and how he would just tell her to do things and she would do them. It was pretty simple. She would just sort of listen to his direction. And there was one scene where she's looking at the auntie as the auntie is eating, and she's supposed to be hungry herself. And Ray sort of put off her meal, so that she would sort of maybe look hungry on screen. Not in a vicious way or anything. I mean, I'm sure she eventually got some food, and he would tell her to sort of look at the auntie's hand as her hand is going up and she's eating, and to play with a string, and so he would give her certain kinds of direction, and she would follow them, and so he liked to use maybe child actors who were a bit untrained and much more natural. And it's really amazing the sorts of performances that he did get out of his younger actors, and I guess he just sort of knew how to do that. He knew how to connect with children, and but as I've said in another podcast, I don't know if Ray really is as famous or as well known as he really should be. Like, why did it take me this long? Like, I don't know. That's on me. That's on me because I watched Charulata several years ago, and I just don't think it hit me the way these other films have hit me. I don't know why. It took me a little too long to discover Ray's work. I mean, I knew about Godard, I knew about Truffaut, I love Truffaut, by the way. I didn't mention him earlier, but I'm much more of a Truffaut fan than a Godard fan, personally. I knew about Tarkovsky, I knew about Kieślowski. I just wasn't as aware of Ray's work, and now I'm like, why did it take so long? Because I really think that, and I said this on Twitter, and I'll say it again, like, you don't really know cinema until you've seen a Satyajit Ray film, or at least seen Potter Panchali. I just feel like you can call yourself a film buff and a cinephile, but I feel like if you have not seen Potter Panchali, there is something missing. There is a chunk missing from your cinema vocabulary and your cinema education, really, because this is such an important film about an everyday family, and it resonates beyond that Bengali village. It resonates, I think, for anybody who comes from maybe a small town world, or a rural or a village life, and it resonates beyond that. You certainly don't have to come from the country to relate to the film. I'm not saying that at all, but I think it has that deeper resonance of that it's capturing people that maybe you don't often see in cinema. You don't often see these stories being told. And I think he continued to do that throughout his career, really, like with The Big City, is films about real people and real issues, and real pain and real joy. and always a very deep and beautiful humanism throughout all of his stories. And I definitely, I'm going to continue to watch his work, and I'm going to continue to watch the Apu trilogy. This is the first in the trilogy, and so I still have many more Ray films to watch. But as I said earlier, I feel like this is really a shift for me, and that I definitely am discovering a different kind of cinema, I think, and I'm trying to definitely expand my knowledge about cinema beyond Europe and beyond the West, and to go deeper and into different forms of cinema around the world. And it's still just amazing to me. Like, I live in this little place in the United States. Like, I live in a place where most people really want to get out and really want to leave. I don't live any kind of exciting or interesting life. I haven't traveled. I haven't gone outside the United States because I don't have the money, and I do come from a working class poor background, and that's been a struggle for much of my life. So I haven't really had the resources or the opportunities to travel around the world like some people, and I really kind of do my traveling through cinema and through books and things like that because I have to. And it's just amazing to me to watch a film that's set in India or set in China or Japan or in any of those places. I really want to watch more Ozu. Ozu is one of those directors that I think is probably up there with Satyajit Ray. I've seen Tokyo Story and Late Spring, and so he's definitely a director that I would like to explore more this year too, because I do think Ozu is just monumental in many ways. But I have to start somewhere, so I'm on Ray right now and doing the Apu trilogy. So it's just amazing to me to watch these films set in other countries, other time periods, like decades and decades ago. And yet I watch them now and, living in my little world, my little small town, in the 21st century. And there are so many things about them that resonate with me, that I find very moving, that I think are beautiful, and it just really expands our world. I mean, things get harder each day, especially under this Trump presidency. You know, as we all know, people who voted for him really voted for him because they don't like diversity and they don't like difference, and they are quite racist, I would have to say. And the media doesn't want to use that terminology, but there are articles that have been written, and really people were saying this after the election as well, that this is racism. He got elected because of racism and anti-immigrant sentiment and xenophobia and sexism, and but we're starting to see the cold hard data, that shows this wasn't about economic anxiety. That's not what this was about. This was about people who are not open to people who are different from them, people who are different races and different religions and different nationalities and ethnicities. This is about racism and nativism, and this is about fear. This is about fear of difference, fear of the other, I guess you could say. And and so I think it's all the more important. And I know other cinephiles and other people who love films have said this as well. It's and the nominees for Best Foreign Film during the Oscars this year said the same thing in a statement, that we need to be breaking down boundaries and borders and walls instead of building them up. And I think if you do that, if you watch more cinema about people outside of your country, outside of your language, and open yourself up to the myriad stories and the myriad ways of life that exist in this world, I think you will be a better person for it. To watch a film like Panchali about a Bengali family in India. It's you see that yes, there are differences. There are very we all live in within very specific social and cultural contexts that should never be erased or minimized. Um, but there are things that connect us as well, and that we need to stop dehumanizing one another and demonizing one another, and we need to be open to different stories and open to different lives and different experiences that are not the same as ours. And unfortunately, something is happening in the United States, and I guess it's been happening a long time, that is very ugly. And I'm not sure what's going to happen. You know, people are being killed. You know, people are being murdered because they are Muslim or because they are Sikh or they are an immigrant. You know, lives are being lost. People are being deported. And of course, we know Obama deported 2.5 million people. So, you know, this is still an issue. And the intolerance and the hatred and the fear that's rising in this country, that's always sort of been there, and the racism, of course, it's just, it leaves you just sort of breathless and speechless, what's happening. And so I don't know how to combat that, really. I think we just have to keep doing our best, to listen and to not become the thing that we despise. You know, I don't want to be like those people who supported Trump. I don't want to be like that ever. I want to be someone who, certainly not perfect, and we all have our faults and our flaws and our prejudices and our biases, but I try so hard to learn about other people and other cultures and things outside of myself. I try so hard. I really do, and it's important to me. And cinema is one way that I do that, where I have to do this as a human being. I have to watch these films, and I have to see these stories, and they are important to me. You know, Satyajit Ray's voice is important to me, and what he had to say and what he had to show. And I think what he created and what he saw and what he expressed and communicated through his films is important, and I think it matters. Just like what Kiarostami communicated through his films, and Ozu, and what Agnes Varda and Chantal Ackerman and so many other directors, the stories that they tell, these are important to me, and they are often about lives on the margins, and I think those are important stories to tell and to experience for yourself. I mean, you are changed by those stories. You really are, and I don't know how you can watch something like Moonlight and not be affected by it or changed by it, or like Ava DuVernay's documentary 13th. I don't know how that can't just change you and how you see prison and incarceration and racism in this country. So there are certain films that they're so important in the way that they awaken you, and how they really wake you up to the world and to the diversity and the vastness of the world, and to the humanity of all people. And so, yeah, I feel like I'm just rambling at this point. But those were just some of my thoughts about Potter Panchali. I struggle to even talk about it. It's just this beautiful, poetic, wondrous film with some really gorgeous scenes about life and about love and family. And so I'm still thinking about it. I'll probably always think about it, and it's sort of become a touchstone for me now, this film. I don't think I'll ever get over it. Honestly, I just, if you have the chance to see it, I would see it. I watched it on Filmstruck. That's the website I watched it on, and there's a lot of extra features as well, like interviews with the cast and the crew, and I've been watching those as well. So just trying to immerse myself in Ray's world and his cinematic vision, and it's been an honor. I mean, there are certain films you watch and it's an honor. It's You feel grateful that you're alive to see this film. You just feel this great privilege and this great honor that you got the chance to see it, and that yeah, that's how I feel about this film. I don't feel that way about every film that I watch, but with this film I feel that way. Like it's an honor to even be able to see it, and what an accomplishment, what a masterpiece, what a contribution to the world Ray made, to all of us really, in this film. Just so beautiful, so important. And like I said, you need to see it. You really do. So it'll affect you, I think. I think if you have a heart, it will affect you. And yeah, I don't know what else to say. I think that's all. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate it. Bye for now.